One constant threat to Christians everywhere are wolves in sheep's clothing. Wolves in sheep's clothing are people who pretend to be of God but are actually being puppeteered by Satan himself. These wolves are very dangerous and they operate in many sneaky ways to draw true believers of Christ close to them in order to devour their faith. If you are not careful, you can open doors to these wolves who can greatly hurt you and your loved ones. The purpose of this video is to provide you with biblical truths on how to identify wolves in sheep's clothing so that you don't become their next prey. Before sharing the tips in this video, let me just say I will treat this topic with as much grace and balance as possible, since there are so many quote-unquote discernment ministries here on YouTube who have wrongly called genuine believers wolves simply because they don't see eye to eye on the biblical point. Be very careful with indulging and watching other Christian YouTube channels' content that are constantly calling out other believers as wolves, heretics, and all this nonsense. We must not carelessly call people wolves, because if we get it wrong, regardless of our intentions, we will cause collateral damage to the body of Christ. That being said, we must also not be afraid to call out and rebuke those who are truly being used as pawns by the enemy. In this next part of the video, I'll share with you 3 biblical truths on how to expose ravenous wolves dressed as sheep. Biblical tip number 1. Look at their fruits. Matthew chapter 7 verses 15 to 16 say the following: Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. One quick way to gauge whether someone is a wolf or a sheep is by their fruits. You can't help but give what's inside of you, much like an apple tree can only give apples or an orange tree can only give oranges. No matter how hard wolves try to conceal their inner motives and intentions, eventually their fruits will expose them. Fruits come from a person's core. They reveal what's tucked away deep inside. People don't change overnight, and so their actions give them away little by little. What do I mean by fruits exactly? Is the person in question showing the fruits of the Spirit, such as joy, love, peace, etc.? Check Galatians 5:22 for more details. To identify a wolf pretending to be a sheep, look at their fruits. Since sheep hear and obey God's voice, John 10:27, look at whether or not a person is obeying God or not. While being a sheep doesn't guarantee not making errors, sheep will always obey God, even if it's with a limp. Biblical tip number 2, look at their doctrine. Romans chapter 16, verses 17 to 18. One of the most effective and quickest ways to spot a wolf masquerading as a sheep is by examining their doctrine. Most wolves acting as sheep are smart enough to not come right out and say, I'm against Christ, or I don't really believe the Bible. So you have to pay close attention, not to just what is explicitly said, but also what's implied. Wolves may seem to preach the true gospel on the surface, but if you look beyond that, they often subtly and slowly start to distort biblical truths before ensnaring you and leading you away from Christ. Without fail, wolves will always lead you away from Christ, so pay careful attention to how their words stack up to Jesus' character and heart. You can ask yourself this: how Christ-centered is their doctrine? Are they leading you to directly or indirectly act more like Christ? Do they downplay Christ's deity or importance? Never judge someone's spirituality or maturity based on supernatural manifestation. It's a surefire way to fall into a deception. A person's fruits and doctrine is more telling of their relationship with Christ than if they manifest the supernatural. Remember, the enemy can also manifest the supernatural, and in such a way that it can appear as being from God. Remember, the enemy comes as an angel of light. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 14. Biblical tip number 3. Look at their willingness to be tested. 1 John chapter 4, verse 1. One dead giveaway of a wolf in sheep's clothing that is not discussed or brought up enough on this topic is the willingness to be tested. Since wolves are doing something wrong and are cognizant of it, see 2 Peter 2:1 to see what I'm saying. They will try to hide certain things to throw off people from digging up their true intentions. The verse says they will secretly bring in destructive heresies, which reveals intentionality, as anything done secretly is also done carefully and purposely. For example, you cannot accidentally throw someone a surprise birthday party. In much the same way, contrary to popular opinion, wolves do in fact know they are wolves. You don't accidentally teach heresies, damning people to hell. Let me clear something up that gets conflated all the time with this topic. A false doctrine is not necessarily a heresy. We need to get the terms we use right, or else we will hurt the body of Christ unintentionally. A heresy is a teaching that contradicts primary doctrines, salvific doctrines, for example, the deity of Christ, the Trinity, etc. There's a difference between primary doctrine and secondary doctrine, and a lot of times, genuine believers are called wolves out of differences when it comes to secondary doctrines like the gifts of the Spirit or the baptism of the Spirit. A heretic is someone who contradicts or denies a primary salvific doctrine. In other words, it affects how someone is saved. It is one thing to think Jesus is not from Bethlehem, and it is another thing to say Jesus is not God. Moral of the story, don't use the word heretic loosely. And that's all for this video on how to identify a wolf in sheep's clothing. Let me know in the comments below if these tips are helpful, or if you know of some other biblical way to identify a wolf in sheep's clothing. As always, thank you for watching, and remember, where the youth lead, the world follows.